Have you ever had one of those moments in life where everything feels so bizarre, so surreal, that you almost want to pinch yourself to make sure you're not trapped in some low-budget comedy skit? That's exactly how I felt, standing barefoot on the cracked concrete of my own driveway, holding a wrench in one hand and a half-packed toolbox in the other, when two men I'd never seen before strutted up to me in fake police uniforms and declared that I was under arrest. Arrested. For what? For refusing to bow to the almighty HOA president and his merry band of clipboard tyrants. If I'm honest, part of me wasn't even surprised. I'd lived here long enough to know the HOA was power-hungry. But this was a new level of insanity. To understand how we got here, you've got to know a little bit about my neighborhood. It's one of those planned communities where every house looks almost identical. Beige siding, neatly trimmed hedges, concrete driveways polished like showroom floors, and mailboxes all painted the same dull brown. From the outside, it looks like a peaceful slice of suburbia. But peel back the curtain and you'll find the HOA board, the self-proclaimed rulers of this cookie-cutter kingdom. They send letters if your grass grows an inch too high, fines if your garbage cans linger too long at the curb, and sternly worded notices of violation if you dare leave holiday decorations up a single day past their arbitrary deadline. When I moved in 3 years ago, I thought I could ignore most of it, pay my dues, nod politely at meetings, and go about my life. But then I met Martin, the new HOA president. Imagine a man who looks like he buys khaki shorts in bulk, struts around with a Bluetooth earpiece permanently lodged in his ear, and acts like he's running a covert operation for the CIA. That's Martin. He loves rules the way kids love candy. He memorizes bylaws like they're scripture and gets this smug little smile when he reminds you that you're in violation. I've dealt with some difficult people before, but Martin takes the cake. The feud started with my fence. The fence was already there when I bought the house. It wasn't flashy or weird. It was just a wooden privacy fence stained a nice dark oak color. The previous owner had all the documentation proving it was approved years ago. Even my realtor had assured me, "Don't worry, this fence is grandfathered in." But the moment Martin got his presidential crown, he decided the fence didn't meet aesthetic standards. He slapped me with a $1,200 fine and demanded I tear it down. Now, I'm not someone who backs down from nonsense. I sent him copies of the paperwork, highlighted in yellow with sticky notes attached that read, "Approved, signed, legal." I thought that would be the end of it. But Martin doesn't like losing. He sent me letter after letter, each one more aggressive than the last, threatening further enforcement measures. I laughed at the time. What could he do? Take me to HOA jail? Turns out in his twisted little imagination the answer was yes. So, that Tuesday morning, I'm tossing tools into my truck bed when a black SUV with tinted windows creeps into my driveway. Out climbed two men dressed like they'd raided the bargain bin of a police supply store. Their uniforms had patches that looked suspiciously homemade. Their badges caught the sun in a way that screamed cheap metal, and their belts, complete with plastic-looking holsters, looked like they'd been ordered from an online costume shop. One of them, a tall guy with a sunburn on his neck and a handlebar mustache that didn't quite fit his baby face, barked, "Sir, step away from the vehicle. You're under arrest." I actually laughed because I thought it was some kind of prank. Arrest for what? Dropping a wrench too loudly? The other guy, shorter and rounder with shifty eyes, puffed out his chest like he'd practiced this moment in the mirror. "You've been reported for repeated non-compliance with community regulations. You're coming with us." I swear I almost dropped my toolbox from laughing. Community regulations? You mean the HOA? You can't arrest me for ignoring Martin's fan club rules. That's not how this works. The tall one stepped closer, trying to look intimidating. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Now, I've dealt with real cops before. These guys? They weren't it. Their movements were stiff, rehearsed. Their patches didn't even have the name of a real department. One literally said, "Security Enforcement Unit." I stared at it, then back at his face. "You're kidding me. You're rent-a-cops. No, wait, not even. You're cosplay rent-a-cops." The shorter one's cheeks flushed red. "We're authorized representatives of the association." "Authorized representatives?" I repeated, mocking his tone. "So not police officers, got it. Just so we're clear, you're trying to impersonate law enforcement on behalf of the HOA? Because that's a felony, my dudes." As if on cue, my neighbor, Mrs. Jacobs, stepped outside with her watering can. She's one of those sweet old ladies who knows everyone's business before you do. She froze mid-step, staring at the scene like she'd just stumbled into an episode of a crime drama. Oh my word. Are they arresting you? Her voice carried across the street, and within seconds blinds were twitching. Doors were opening and neighbors started trickling out to watch. Martin had wanted me humiliated. He wanted me dragged off in front of an audience. But what he hadn't counted on was just how ridiculous his plan looked under the light of day. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Let's make this official, shall we?" I said, zooming in on their fake badges. "So you're saying you're cops? You're arresting me for ignoring HOA rules. Is that your final answer?" The shorter one stammered. We're acting under authority." "Whose authority? Martin's? Because unless Martin secretly became the sheriff of this county overnight, you're breaking several serious laws right now." The tall one glared at me but didn't move. His hands twitched at his sides like he wanted to grab something but wasn't sure what. His holster was empty, thank God. Mrs. Jacobs whipped out her phone too. "I'm recording," she called. "This is outrageous." Now a small crowd had gathered at the edge of my driveway. Families in flip-flops, kids on scooters, even a couple walking their golden retriever paused to gawk. They murmured among themselves, pointing at the fake cops. I could practically feel the tide turning. The more neighbors saw, the more ridiculous Martin's scheme looked. "Don't move," I said to the two men, "because I'm calling the sheriff's office right now. And when real cops show up, we'll see how well this little charade holds up." I dialed the non-emergency number on speakerphone. "Yes, hi. I've got two individuals impersonating police officers in my driveway. They're trying to arrest me on behalf of my homeowners association." "Yes, I'm recording." "Yes, they're still here." The dispatcher's tone went from bored to sharp in a heartbeat. She promised a unit would be sent immediately. I ended the call and grinned at the two fake enforcers. "Congratulations, you're about to meet real law enforcement. Hope you've got a good story." The shorter one muttered under his breath, "We're just following orders." "Oh, that's cute. Straight out of a bad movie," I shot back. That's when Martin himself came stomping down the sidewalk. Red-faced, sweating through his polo shirt, he marched toward us like he was about to personally throw me into the back of the SUV. His voice was shrill, almost cracking as he yelled, "What is going on here?" I spread my arms wide like a magician unveiling a trick. "Perfect timing, Martin. Your little fake cops here were just about to explain to the sheriff why they're impersonating law enforcement on your behalf." His face paled, then flushed deeper. "This is illegal enforcement action." "You're in violation. You ignored notices. You left us no choice." The crowd erupted in boos. Yes, literal boos, like he was a bad guy in a wrestling match. Mrs. Jacobs shouted, "Shame on you, Martin." Someone else yelled, "You can't do this, it's illegal." A teenager snickered, "Nice cosplay, losers." Martin's confidence faltered. He tugged at his collar, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. His plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating me, he was the one exposed. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, savoring the moment. "You wanted a show, Martin. Congratulations, everyone's watching. And when the sheriff gets here, they'll be watching you squirm." For the first time, Martin's mask cracked. He stuttered. His words tangled, but before he could recover, the faint wail of sirens drifted through the air. Every head turned. The sound grew louder. Blue and red lights flickered in the distance. The real cops were on their way. And in that moment, standing in my driveway with half the neighborhood watching, I realized the HOA had just made the biggest mistake of its life. The real show was about to begin. The wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off the identical beige houses, rattling the carefully pruned hedges, and pulling every last neighbor out of hiding. By the time the sheriff's cruiser turned onto our street, lights flashing, it felt like the whole neighborhood was gathered. Mothers clutching their kids, retirees in sandals, teenagers with their phones raised high. Every single one of them waiting to see how this circus would end. The two fake cops stiffened the second the patrol car came into view. Their posturing melted into sheer panic. The tall one's hand hovered over his empty holster, then twitched back to his side like he was afraid to even breathe wrong. The short one's Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he swallowed hard, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "We're screwed." Martin, however, tried to keep his composure. He puffed up his chest, wiped the sweat off his forehead. I nodded, holding up my phone with the recording still rolling. "Yep. These two showed up in my driveway, told me I was under arrest for ignoring HOA regulations, and tried to drag me off. They're dressed like police officers, but look at those patches. Security enforcement unit? That's not a thing. She leaned closer to inspect their uniforms, her lip curling in disgust. Oh, for God's sake, she muttered. The first deputy stepped between the imposters and the SUV, hand resting casually on his gun. All right, gentlemen. Badges on the ground slowly. The tall one sputtered. Look, this isn't what it looks like. We were just hired. Badges, now. Reluctantly, they unclipped the fake metal shields from their shirts and set them down on the pavement. One clinked loudly against the concrete, echoing in the tense silence. Martin suddenly surged forward, his face redder than ever. Officer, wait. This is a misunderstanding. These men are authorized representatives of the Homeowners Association. They were enforcing community standards. It's perfectly legal. The female deputy turned her sharp gaze on him. Legal? Are you telling me you instructed these men to impersonate law enforcement? Martin stammered. They're not impersonating. They're enforcers for the HOA. The crowd erupted in laughter. Actual laughter. Neighbors doubled over, clutching their stomachs. Someone shouted, "Nice try, Martin." Another voice chimed in, "Enforcers? What is this, the mafia?" Even the deputies couldn't fully hide their disbelief. The male deputy raised his brows, his voice flat. "Sir, what's your name?" "Martin Hastings," he answered quickly, puffing his chest out like he was proud. "President of the Oak Meadows Homeowners Association." The deputy's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hastings, you do realize impersonating a police officer is a felony, right? These men are in uniforms designed to mimic law enforcement. They attempted to detain a resident without cause. That's not just illegal, it's dangerous." Martin waved his arms frantically. No, you don't understand. They weren't impersonating. They were just making sure our community rules were followed. This man, he jabbed a finger at me, spit flying from his mouth, has ignored multiple violations. He's defiant. He thinks he's above the rules. I smirked. Rules aren't laws, Martin. And you don't get to send fake cops after me because I don't want to pay for your nonsense. The shorter fake cop finally broke down completely. He held his hands out desperately. We didn't know it was illegal. Martin told us it was fine. He said we were community officers, not police. The taller one added quickly, "Yeah, we thought it was just like neighborhood security. We didn't think it would blow up like this." The deputies exchanged a look, the kind that said they'd heard enough excuses for one day. The male deputy pulled out his radio and spoke into it. "Dispatch, we've got 2 in custody for impersonation of law enforcement. Requesting backup for transport." The words hit Martin like a brick. His jaw dropped. "In custody? No, you can't arrest them. They were just doing their jobs." The female deputy turned to him slowly, her eyes narrowing. "And you, Mr. Hastings, may want to stop talking until you have a lawyer. Because if you ordered them to do this, you could be facing charges yourself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered loudly, "Finally!" Another voice cheered, "Down with the HOA tyrant!" The energy shifted completely. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Martin's face. I leaned casually against my truck, enjoying every second. "Hey, Martin," I called, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Guess you're not above the law after all." The female deputy asked me to play back the recording. I handed her my phone. The video showing the imposters declaring I was under arrest for ignoring HOA regulations. The crowd listened in rapt silence as the ridiculousness replayed, the imposters' voices shaking with false authority. The deputy shook her head. "This is more than enough evidence." She returned my phone and gave me a small nod. "You did the right thing calling us." By now, backup had arrived. Another cruiser pulled up and the imposters were handcuffed. Their fake belts removed, their walkie-talkies tossed onto the hood of the SUV. Watching them shuffle awkwardly toward the back of the patrol car was deeply satisfying. The neighbors clapped. Actual applause rang out like we were at some community theater performance. Martin stood frozen, his face pale, his hands twitching at his sides. For a moment I thought he might faint. Then he tried to rally, his voice trembling but loud. "You people don't understand. Without the HOA, this community falls apart. We need order. We need enforcement." The male deputy turned to him with a look of pure disdain. "Sir, order doesn't come from intimidation. And it sure as hell doesn't come from fake cops." The crowd erupted again, this time in cheers. Kids whooped. A teenager shouted, "Power to the people!" Mrs. Jacobs, bless her soul, wagged a finger at Martin. You should be ashamed of yourself. Pretending this is some dictatorship. This is America, Martin sputtered, sweat dripping down his temples. This isn't over, he cried. You'll all regret this when property values plummet. But his words were drowned out by laughter. The deputies didn't even bother responding. They were too busy securing evidence and radioing in details about the arrest. I stood there, grinning, my phone still recording, capturing every second of Martin's humiliation. The neighbors weren't just watching anymore, they were emboldened. Whispers spread through the crowd about filing complaints, organizing a petition to remove the HOA board, maybe even pressing charges against Martin personally. The monster he had tried to unleash on me had backfired and turned the entire community against him. As the imposters were loaded into the patrol car, the female deputy turned to me. We'll need you to come by the station to give a statement later. Your video will be crucial evidence. Happy to, I said. Believe me, I've got plenty to say. The male deputy gave me a small nod. Good work standing your ground. People like this, he glanced at Martin with visible disgust, think they can bend the law to their will. But that's not how it works. I felt a swell of vindication. For months, Martin had made my life miserable with threats and letters. And now, in one glorious afternoon, his empire of petty fines and intimidation was collapsing in front of everyone. The patrol car pulled away, the imposters inside looking utterly defeated. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement. Neighbors clapped me on the back, muttering things like "well done" and "about time someone stood up to him." Even people who had always kept to themselves seemed suddenly united in their disdain for Martin. And Martin? He stood alone, trembling, sweating, his once smug posture reduced to a sagging slump. His eyes darted nervously as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The real law had arrived, and his little dictatorship was unraveling. I caught his eye one last time. Hope that fence was worth it, Martin, I said coolly. Because you just tore down your entire reputation instead. The crowd chuckled. Martin opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, the king of Oak Meadows looked utterly powerless. The sirens faded in the distance, and the summer air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and the sound of neighbors murmuring about change. The neighborhood had seen Martin for who he truly was, and there was no coming back from this. And me? I knew this was just the beginning. Martin's downfall had started, but the real consequences, those were still on their way. When the patrol car carrying the imposters disappeared down the street, you could almost feel the neighborhood exhale as one. The crowd lingered in clusters, whispering, gossiping, laughing nervously about what they had just witnessed. The mighty HOA president, the man who spent years terrorizing people with fines, letters, and threats, had been exposed in front of his entire fiefdom. Martin stood there like a deflated balloon, sweat still dripping down his temples, his polo shirt clinging to him in the heat. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He wanted so badly to regain control, to bark some order that would make everyone fall back in line. But the power he thought he had evaporated in seconds. Nobody was scared of him anymore. Nobody even respected him. If anything, people looked at him with disgust, like he was something they needed to scrape off their shoe. Mrs. Jacobs marched right up to him, shaking her phone in his face. I recorded everything, she declared proudly, and I'm sending it to the local news. They'll love a story like this. Fake cops in our neighborhood? People need to know. Martin's mouth fell open. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I would, she said, her voice firm for the first time in the 10 years I'd known her. You humiliated this community for long enough. This is the last straw, others chimed in. We're calling a meeting tonight, someone shouted. We're voting him out, another added. It was chaos, but a different kind of chaos, hopeful chaos. Martin tried to salvage what was left. He raised his hands like a preacher. Listen to me. All of you. This man. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. He's the real problem. He refuses to follow rules, and now you're siding with him? You're all blind to what's at stake. Without the HOA, this neighborhood will fall apart. Property values will plummet. Outsiders will flood in. You'll regret this. But nobody was buying it. They'd seen too much. They'd watched two men nearly drag me off in handcuffs that didn't exist. And they'd seen the sheriff's deputies treat it like the crime it was. The curtain had been pulled back, and Martin wasn't a ruler anymore. He was a clown. I let him rant, let him spit and flail, and then I spoke. Not loudly, but calmly, with just enough bite in my tone that it cut through the chatter. You just tried to kidnap me in front of half the neighborhood, Martin. Do you really think anyone here is going to keep following you after this?" The crowd went silent. All eyes turned to him. His lips quivered, his fists clenched, and then, for the first time since I'd known him, he said nothing. No excuse, no long-winded lecture about bylaws, nothing. Just silence. That night, the community gathered in the clubhouse. Normally, these meetings were dull affairs, arguments about grass length, heated debates over mailbox paint colors, but this time, the room was packed. Standing room only, people who never cared about HOA politics showed up because they smelled blood in the water, and Martin knew it. He sat at the head of the table, his usual spot of honor, but the energy had shifted. He didn't look like a leader anymore. He looked cornered. His little allies on the board, people who used to nod and back him up at every turn, kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact with the angry mob of homeowners glaring at them. One by one, people stood and spoke. They told stories I hadn't even heard before. A single mom who got fined 3 times in 1 month because her son left his bike on the porch. An older man who was threatened with foreclosure because he painted his shutters the wrong shade of blue. A family who had to pay hundreds of dollars for unauthorized landscaping when their kids planted a flower bed. Every story piled on top of the last, and each one made Martin shrink a little further into his chair. By the time it was my turn, the air in the room was thick with anger. I stood, cleared my throat, and let the silence build for a second. "You all saw what happened today," I began. "Martin sent 2 men dressed like cops to arrest me in my own driveway. Not because I broke the law, but because I refused to pay a fine he had no right to issue. He tried to humiliate me. Instead, he humiliated all of us. Because those men weren't there just for me. They were there to scare anyone who dared to say no. And if I hadn't filmed it, if the deputies hadn't arrived when they did, who knows what would have happened?" I let that sink in. You could have heard a pin drop, then I added, "We trusted him to protect this neighborhood. Instead, he endangered it. He broke the law. And if we don't act now, if we let him keep his position, then we're just as guilty as he is." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, people shouting, "Vote him out." The sound was deafening. Martin tried to bang his gavel, tried to restore order, but his voice was drowned in the roar of voices demanding his removal. Within 20 minutes, a motion was put forward. The board, cornered and terrified of being associated with him, voted unanimously to remove him as president. Martin stood trembling, sputtering about legal technicalities about how this wasn't valid, but it didn't matter. He was out. That was only the beginning. The next day, the local news van showed up. Mrs. Jacobs had delivered her promise, and now there were cameras parked on the street, interviewing neighbors. My video went viral online within hours. Headlines screamed, "HOA president sends fake cops to arrest resident." It spread like wildfire, shared across social media, picked up by news stations in other states, even making its way onto late-night talk shows. People laughed, people raged, and people related. Everyone seemed to have their own nightmare HOA story, and Martin became the poster child for everything wrong with these organizations. The fallout was brutal. The sheriff's office announced they were investigating both Martin and the imposters. The 2 men were charged with impersonating officers, and they cut deals with prosecutors in exchange for testifying against Martin. Turns out he'd paid them under the table, told them they were community police, and assured them it was perfectly legal. They sang like canaries, and every word dragged Martin deeper into the hole. Meanwhile, the community turned on him completely. People who used to avoid rocking the boat were suddenly bold. They filed complaints. They demanded audits of HOA finances. They exposed every shady thing Martin had done during his reign. And the HOA itself? It collapsed. With Martin gone, his allies resigned within weeks. Nobody wanted to be associated with the scandal. Eventually, the homeowners voted to dissolve the association altogether. The bylaws that had dictated every detail of our lives, gone. The endless fines, gone. The stupid power trips, gone. For the first time in years, people were free. Kids left bikes on porches without fear of fines. Families painted shutters whatever color they wanted. Neighbors actually smiled at each other, laughed, and talked openly. The community felt alive again. As for Martin, his downfall was complete. He was arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and misuse of association funds. His mugshot was plastered all over the internet. The Bluetooth headset that never left his ear. Gone the smug look he always wore. Gone, he looked like a broken man, hollow-eyed, defeated. I heard later that his wife left him, embarrassed by the scandal. His job fired him after his face hit the news. And the house he'd lorded over everyone with foreclosed when the legal fees drained his accounts. He vanished after that, moving away quietly, leaving behind nothing but his legacy as the most infamous HOA president anyone had ever seen. Sometimes when I sit on my porch at night, sipping a beer and watching kids ride scooters past my unapproved fence, I think about that day, about the sirens, the crowd, the fake cops sweating under the sheriff's glare, about Martin's face when he realized he'd lost everything. And every time I smile, because for once, the little guy won, and the so-called king of the neighborhood, he was dethroned, not by force but by the very people he thought he controlled. It was the perfect ending.